One of the big questions that is roiling on the right is the question of the role of religion. We've been called Christian nationalists, and a lot of people say, no, Christian nationalists is good. Now, obviously, we feel that our values are essentially Christian values, or at least we're shaped by Christian values, but we also believe that there's a separation of church and state, and we want to know what that's about. So I learned something in church this week, last Sunday, that I didn't know before, and it was really interesting. It was the feast of Christ the King. I go to an Anglican Catholic church, which is essentially a Catholic church, but without the overriding allegiance to Rome. And it was the feast of Christ the King, celebrating Christ's kingship over all people and all nations. Now, when you talk to Catholics, devout Catholics, a lot of them really know the history, not just of the church, because I know the history of the church. I know the church's role in history, but they know the history of kind of weird, small arguments and not so small arguments, and they can quote this, this epistle and that encyclical and all that stuff. That's, if you ever wonder why Knowles is so annoying, that is why, because they know so much about this stuff. But I don't. I actually don't. And so when I'm told that it's the feast of Christ the King, I just think, oh, well, that's one of the feasts of the church, and it's been the feast of the church since St. Paul spoke in Greece or whatever. But in fact, this turns out not to be true, as the priest in my church, in an excellent sermon, explained. He said that Christ the King is a fairly recent feast. It's only about 100 years old, and it was declared a feast in the 1920s by Pope Pius XI. And the Pope explains in his encyclical that established the feast that feasts are made by the Church to meet the needs of the historical moment. So in the old days, in the age of martyrdom, there would be feasts of martyrs to encourage people to understand that you were not going to be forgotten, that martyrs became saints. And there was a feast of Corpus Christi, which was instituted in a more modern age when people felt, or the church felt, that the devotion to the sacrament of the Mass needed to be reinforced. So the Feast of Christ the King was instituted in the 20s by Pius XI because in the aftermath of World War I, the Pope saw that international politics was unraveling. And he saw that there was this two-part division, leftist discord between the classes and right-wing hyper-nationalism were both on the rise and threatening to lead to more wars. They obviously did. And this is the Pope who made a treaty with Hitler and was one of many, many, many people, who had to find out the hard way that a treaty with Hitler was not a meaningful thing, right? Because Hitler didn't pay any attention to treaties. And by the time he died in 1939, Pope Pius XI, he died warning people about Hitler and Mussolini, is saying they were not good guys. So the Feast of Christ the King was supposed to remind people that while many forms of government can be Christian, all politics has to serve Christ above them, has to put Christ above them. And he writes in his encyclical, with God and Jesus Christ excluded from political life, which he saw happening more and more as we see it now, with authority derived not from God but from man, the very basis of that authority has been taken away because the chief reason of the distinction between ruler and subject has been eliminated. The result is that human society is tottering to its fall because it has no longer a secure and solid foundation. Now, this is what I talk about when I talk about supernatural meaning, a meaning above nature, the idea that the material world is like a language that speaks to us of a world higher than itself. And this, if we live without that meaning, Christianity, I know this is going to be a surprise to somebody, but Christianity is not defined by who you dislike. It's not defined by what you disapprove of. It's not even defined by what you have determined is sin in other people, right? It is determined by living in such a way that you are living not into the values of this world, but into the values of that supernatural, above nature meaning, which is the kingdom of heaven. So the Pope gives examples of citizens obeying their leaders and women submitting to the authority, wives submitting to the authority of their husbands, and even slaves, meaning the old kind of slaves, a family servant, submitting to their masters, not because of the nature of their leaders, but because the leaders, the husbands, the masters are supposed to act in the image of Christ. That is the whole point, right? So if your leader is literally Hitler, by which I don't mean Donald Trump, I mean literally Hitler, and if your husband is punching you or something like that, or if your father is molesting you, if your experts are castrating little boys and cutting the breasts off healthy girls, submission time is over. That's it, right? Because it's a two-way deal. It is a two-way deal. You know, you as a husband, you have authority in your home because you represent God, essentially. And if you're not doing that, if you're beating your wife up, you are not doing that. So if you regard, so here's the thing, when you eliminate that supernatural meaning, when you say that the world is just the world, the flesh is just the flesh, that's it. There's no meaning above the world, you know, then just, there's no reason to do anything but make some money, screw some dames, and, you know, have a good time and die, right? Because there's no kingdom of heaven, so what difference does it make? If there is no supernatural meaning, here is the trick to this. Then everything the demonic left says is true. Everything they say is true if there is no God. I keep telling this to people, and they don't seem to quite get it. They say that gender is a performance. I was talking about this before. Gender is a performance. They say morality is relative. Society is a construct. All those things are true if gender and morality and society aren't symbolic of something above the flesh, if they're not symbolic of God's truth, of God's kingdom, if they're not grounded in God, if they're not relative, you know, men and women, as I keep saying, are an image of facets of God, right? And they may be performances to some degree. There's no reason a woman should wear a skirt and a man should wear pants. That's a sort of performative thing that we do to remind ourselves of the role we play in symbolizing God. Without supernatural meaning, this is the other thing. You know, the Pope was worried about communism and fascism. Without supernatural meaning, those are the only forms of government that actually make any sense. Because you have to have some standards, you have to have some justice. And if you either have the state come in and say, we're going to decide that everybody's equal, everybody's going to be equal, the state said, not us, of course, but the rest of you are all going to be equal, and that means you're not going to have freedom, because you can't make me play at the level of LeBron James. I can't play basketball at the level of LeBron James. If you want us to be equal, LeBron has to play at my level, and that means he can't be free to make the best of himself, right? That's how it works. If you can't be free, if Jeff Bezos can't be free to get rich, no Amazon. If he has to give all his money to me, he's not going to get up in the morning and build an Amazon, which is actually a pretty good service. So all of these things work if there's no God. And if there's no God, the other thing is you can invent a system that is going to fix everything. And this is why I get into arguments even with people here at the Daily Wire about capitalism and about the wonderful separation of powers in the Constitution. If there's no God, those things fix everything, because capitalism harnesses your greed, harnesses your ambition, so that it actually has to serve other people. It has to give other people what they want. But as I keep pointing out, capitalism also includes selling porn, selling fentanyl, selling prostitutes. All of those things are perfectly good capitalism. Capitalism also involves people becoming billionaires and then treating their workers like garbage. That really happens. They didn't come to be workers' unions because we didn't need unions. Unions are a necessary evil. They are evil because they abuse their power, but without them, before them, even before the threat of them, people abuse their workers on a very, very regular basis, and it still happens, and capitalism has to basically be overseen by Christ the King. Democracy too. If you have democracy, you have powers in conflict, that's great. It means that each person's striving for power is going to play off somebody else's striving for power, the Senate against the president against the courts, all these things. And so you're going to get, everybody's supposed to rise, but pretty soon they're all going to collude together because they're all in power and we're not. And pretty soon you're going to get a government like we have now, where it's really a deep state that is not responsive to what we want at all. So all of that stuff, it has to be run by Christ the King, which means we understand that there's a supernatural meaning, which means we understand that each person matters. Each person doesn't matter without God. Without a supernatural meaning, who cares if some guy is on the street? Who cares? Really, I mean, what difference does it make? I always wonder why the atheist left, why they're so against racism. Who cares? Who cares? It's only because we believe that they are the image of God. That's what I'm talking about, of having a supernatural meaning. It's only because we believe that people are in the image of God that we expect them to be treated with respect. Now, here is the confusing thing about Christianity. This is a really important point, because those of us who love the Christian religion, as I do, we take some pride in the fact that over slow centuries, Christian ideas have transformed our society for the better. Ideas like the dignity of the individual and care for the poor, the rights of women, the sacredness of marriage, these are gifts of Christianity, and they have transformed our society for the better. Even people who violate these ideas, even the left, when they want to destroy marriage or destroy, women, basically, by saying they don't exist, they're frequently making Christian arguments. We're frequently having these internecine feuds where we say, "Thou shalt not commit adultery," and they say, "Judge not, lest you be judged," right? And we say, well, wait, that's not what that means exactly, because adultery remains a central sin, but still, you understand that they are making a Christian argument, and we have to argue on Christian terms. So Christianity has made society better. But the other side of that is Christianity doesn't tell us that society is going to get better. It doesn't promise us that society is going to get better. It promises us that the world is going to be bad, and then it's going to end. And when it ends, it's not going to be pretty. Some of us think that the Klavanless week is a form, a shape of what's to come in the apocalypse. I think it probably is. But the point is, Christianity tells you the world is going to stink. Christ is king, but as he himself said, his kingdom is not of this world. And that is why I'm not technically a Christian nationalist. Christ is king, but his kingdom is not of this world. And in order to follow Christ and obey him, you have to put the kingdom of this world second and his kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, first. So that means this, right? What does that mean? Because people ask me, well, how can a Christian be effective politically? And the truth is, there are times when you simply can't. There are times when you simply have to follow the kingdom of heaven and let the kingdom of this world take care of itself. Times of peace are better than times of war. We should all work for peace, but sometimes there has to be war. Times of unity are better than times of division. I think in heaven people are so unified that maybe the borders of self actually vanish, if possible. And times of greater freedom are better than the Joe Biden administration. But in every time, evil is present, and somebody's getting it in the neck. You're just lucky it doesn't happen to be you. The 1950s were a healthier time in America, but yes, black people were getting it in the neck. They were being mistreated. They want to be included, that's great, but then somebody else is being mistreated. There's always somebody who is getting the short end. But we can't be doing it. We can't be the ones who are doing it. Eventually, the end of the world will come, and while I'm not in charge of judgment, I don't think the thing they're going to ask you at the pearly gates is, did you remember to condemn other people? What I think the truth is that Christianity does not save the world. It openly says it does not save the world. It saves you, and that means you have to sometimes act against the world. You have to tell the truth and get canceled. You have to be true to your wife and miss out on falling in love with somebody else. You have to make less money in your business in order to do the right thing. You can't always be an effective Christian and an effective politician, and that's why you've got to stay cool. That is why you have to have joy in your Christianity, because sometimes you're not going to have joy in life. People write to me and say, well, you're a traitor because you said something nasty about Donald Trump. I don't serve Donald Trump. I don't serve Donald Trump. And people will say, well, you supported this or you supported that. I only am trying to do what I think I'm supposed to do. So listen, everything dies, everything falls. And if you're lucky, like I was lucky, you get born into a time of prosperity and peace and freedom, and things are tickety-boo, right? You guys who are younger than I am, you're a little less lucky. You are born in this time of transition when things have a possibility of flying apart. I don't think they will. I think they'll come back together. But right this minute, things are kind of falling apart a little bit. Our values are uncertain. Our ideas are uncertain. There's this terrible fight between two sides. But you just have to keep doing what you believe with your discernment and prayer, what Christ wants you to do. Every system has within it the seeds. Marx thought that the tensions within a system were going to lead to paradise. I think the tensions within the system are part of the fact that it dies. Eventually, that system falls apart. It doesn't necessarily get replaced with paradise. Sometimes it gets replaced with chaos. This is the curse of the world. Death arises from human brokenness, and it infects everything. Sometimes you'll live morally and speak truly, and everybody will respect you for it. Sometimes you'll live morally and speak truly, and they'll throw you off Twitter and then cast you to the lions, right? At every time, in every case, in war and peace, from dawn to decadence, from wealth to ruination, Christ is king. So follow your king. Follow your king and pay the price. His kingdom is not of this world. This world is going to happen, is going to unfold as it unfolds. Be not afraid. Let not your heart be troubled. It wasn't Sean Hannity who said that, it was Jesus. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid, and follow the king. How much gooder could Klavan-y goodness get? Find out by liking and subscribing. And don't forget to subscribe to the Andrew Klavan Podcast.